April 17, 1945, 14:23 hours, 340 miles over the Pacific Ocean, approaching Okinawa. Captain Robert "Bobby" Caldwell, 24 years old, from Tulsa, Oklahoma, felt the shudder run through the entire aircraft before he heard the sound. A sharp, metallic crack, followed by a hissing that meant only one thing: catastrophic hydraulic failure. Bobby had 2,147 hours of flight time. He'd learned to fly in his father's Piper Cub back in 1938 when he was 17. Soloed at 18. Got his commercial license at 19. Joined the Army Air Corps in 1941, 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor. Trained at Randolph Field, Texas. Then advanced training at Columbus, Mississippi. B-25 transition training at Greenville, South Carolina. He'd been flying combat missions since October 1944. 6 months, 32 missions. Seen friends go down. Watched B-25s explode from flak hits. Brought aircraft home with engines out, with hydraulics damaged, with holes you could crawl through. But this was different. This was the nightmare scenario. Total hydraulic failure. 400 miles from friendly territory, over open ocean, with 6 men depending on him to make the right call. The North American B-25J Mitchell, serial number 44-30854, call sign Devil's Dice, was about to become a flying coffin unless Bobby made the right choice in the next 10 minutes. Except there was no right choice. Only 2 ways to die, and he had to pick which one gave them the best chance of not dying at all. The B-25J Mitchell. The final production variant of America's most versatile medium bomber. 2 Wright R-2629 twin Cyclone radial engines, each producing 1,900 horsepower. Wingspan, 67 feet, 7 inches. Length, 52 feet, 11 inches. Maximum takeoff weight, 35,000 pounds, loaded with bombs and fuel. Crew, 6 men. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator/bombardier, radio operator/waist gunner, engineer/top turret gunner, and tail gunner. All depending on Bobby to make the right call. But the hydraulic system, the lifeblood of the aircraft's control surfaces, was dying. The gauge showed pressure dropping. 2,800 psi normal, now 2,200, now 1,800, falling fast. Without hydraulics, they lost critical systems. Landing gear extension, hydraulic. Wing flaps, hydraulic. Bomb bay doors, hydraulic. Nose wheel steering, hydraulic. Brakes, hydraulic. In other words, without hydraulics, landing became a controlled crash at best, and a fireball at worst. Bobby keyed the intercom. "Listen up, we've got hydraulic failure. Main line ruptured, probably took shrapnel from that flak burst over the target. We're losing all hydraulic pressure. We need to make a decision now." His co-pilot, Lieutenant James "Jim" Patterson, 23, from Portland, Maine, checked the gauges. "Pressure's at 1,500 and dropping. We've got maybe 5 minutes before we're at 0. "Options?" Bobby asked, though he already knew. He'd been through every emergency procedure at flight school. This was the nightmare scenario they'd trained for, but hoped never to face. Jim ran through it mechanically, voice steady despite the situation. Option 1, bail out. 6 men, 6 parachutes, Pacific Ocean. Water temperature, 58 degrees. Survival time in water without rescue, 2 hours maximum. Distance to nearest friendly ship, unknown. Probability of pickup, low. Option 2? Try to land at Kadena Airfield on Okinawa. But without hydraulics, we can't lower gear normally, can't deploy flaps, can't use brakes. We'd be landing hot, 140 miles per hour instead of 90, on a 6,000-foot runway, with no way to stop. Bobby thought about it. 6,000 feet sounded like a lot, but landing 40% faster than normal meant they'd use runway 4 times as fast. Simple physics. They'd need 24,000 feet to stop safely. They had 6,000.
"Math doesn't work," Bobby said quietly. "We'd run off the end. And there's buildings, parked aircraft, fuel dumps at the end of that runway. We'd hit something. At 140 miles per hour, we'd be dead."
"Then we bail out," said Staff Sergeant Eddie Morrison, the engineer, from the top turret. 22 years old, from Detroit. Better chance in the water than hitting a fuel dump at 140. But Bobby was thinking about something else. Something dangerous. Something that technically wasn't allowed. Something that could kill them all if he got it wrong. A ground loop. In aviation, a ground loop is what happens when an aircraft on the ground suddenly pivots, usually uncontrollably, around its vertical axis. The tail swings around, the aircraft spins, and if you're going fast enough, it can flip, cartwheel, break apart.
Ground loops are accidents, career enders, court-martial material. The kind of thing that happens when a pilot loses control during landing or takeoff. But Bobby was thinking, what if you did it on purpose? What if, instead of trying to land straight and running off the end of the runway at lethal speed, you deliberately induced a ground loop, forced the aircraft to spin, used the sideways momentum to bleed off speed? It was insane. The B-25 weighed 17 tons loaded. Ground looping at high speed would generate enormous lateral forces. The landing gear could collapse. The wing could dig in and flip them. The aircraft could cartwheel and explode. But it might scrub off enough speed to keep them on the runway, keep them from hitting the fuel dump, keep them alive.
Bobby had seen it happen once. Not a B-25, a C-47 transport. Engine failure on takeoff. Pilot couldn't climb, couldn't stop. Deliberately ground looped to avoid running into a hangar. The C-47 spun like a top, landing gear collapsed, but the crew walked away. Of course, the C-47 was going 60 miles per hour. Bobby would be doing 140. "Jim," Bobby said carefully, "what do you know about intentional ground loops?" Jim stared at him. "You're not serious." "Dead serious. We can't bail out. 6 men in the Pacific with no guaranteed rescue. We can't land straight. We'll run off the runway and hit something solid at 140 miles per hour. But if we land and deliberately spin out, use the lateral momentum to kill our forward speed, we might stay on the runway. We might also flip and burn."
"Yeah, but might is better than definitely. Bailing out is probably death. Landing straight is definitely death. Ground looping is maybe death, maybe survival. I'll take maybe over definitely." The tail gunner, Corporal Mike Chen, 19, from San Francisco, spoke up. "Sir, my dad's a crop duster. He ground looped once, accidentally, trying to avoid a tractor. Said it was the most violent thing he ever experienced. And he was going 40 miles per hour in a Stearman biplane. We're talking 3 times that speed in an aircraft 4 times heavier." "I know, but you got a better idea?" Silence on the intercom. Nobody did. Bobby made the decision. "Okay, here's the plan. We're going to land on Kadena, but we're not landing straight. Soon as we touch down, I'm going to kick full left rudder and cut the right engine. Force the aircraft into a ground loop. The spin will kill our forward momentum. We'll either stop on the runway, or we'll tear ourselves apart trying. Either way, it's better odds than the alternatives." "Sir," said the navigator, Lieutenant David Kowalski, 25, from Chicago. "I need to say this for the record. This is the craziest thing I've ever heard. But I can't think of anything better. I'm in." One by one, the crew agreed. They were all in. Because Bobby was right. Maybe was better than definitely. "Okay," Bobby said. "Strap in tight. Tighter than you've ever strapped before. This is going to be rough.
Eddie, Jim, I need you both on the controls with me. When I say now, we cut right engine power to idle and firewall the left. That'll start the spin. Then we ride it out."
They approached Kadena Airfield at 14:37. Bobby radioed the tower. "Kadena Tower, this is Devil's Dice. We have catastrophic hydraulic failure. No gear control, no flaps, no brakes. We're coming in hot, and we're going to ground loop intentionally. Clear the runway. Crash crews stand by." There was a long pause. Then, "Devil's Dice, Tower. Say again? You're going to ground loop intentionally?" "Affirmative. We can't stop otherwise. We'll either ground loop or hit your fuel dump. We choose ground loop." Another pause. "Understood. Runway cleared. Crash crews standing by. Good luck." Bobby lined up on final approach. Runway 09, 6,000 feet of concrete. The B-25 was coming in fast, 145 miles per hour. Way too fast. But without flaps, they couldn't slow down more. The hydraulic pressure gauge read 0. They were committed now. "Landing gear," Bobby called. "Manual extension." Jim and Eddie cranked the manual landing gear extension. It was a backup system, pure mechanical advantage, cables and pulleys. Hard work. Took 2 minutes of cranking. But eventually, 3 green lights. Gear down and locked. Mechanically. No hydraulics needed. Small miracle. At least they wouldn't belly land. But they still had no brakes. No nose wheel steering. No way to stop except friction. And at 140, friction wasn't enough. They crossed the threshold at 14:39. Bobby held the nose up as long as possible. Bleeding speed. 140. 135. 130. The main wheels touched. Hard landing, without flaps. It was more of a controlled crash than a landing. The aircraft bounced, came down again, stayed down. They were on the runway, going 130 miles per hour, with 6,000 feet to stop. Except they couldn't stop. Bobby counted. 1,001. 1,002. They'd already used 500 feet. "Now!" Bobby shouted. He stomped full left rudder, pushed the left rudder pedal to the floor with every ounce of force his leg could generate. Cut the right engine to idle, throttle all the way back. Firewall the left engine, throttle pushed all the way forward, full power, full thrust. The B-25 Mitchell, 17 tons of aircraft, suddenly had one engine at full power on the left, producing 1,900 horsepower. One engine at idle on the right, producing maybe 200 horsepower. The differential thrust was enormous. 1,700 horsepower trying to push the left side of the aircraft forward while the right side coasted. The nose tried to swing left. Started to, but slowly. Too slowly. The aircraft was too heavy, going too fast. Aerodynamic forces wanted to keep them going straight. They'd used already 1,500 feet of runway. They needed more. More force. More lateral acceleration. More everything. Bobby did something desperate. Something that would have gotten him failed out of flight school. He hit the left brake, the one remaining brake that still had a tiny bit of residual hydraulic pressure, maybe 300 psi out of the normal 2,800. Barely enough to engage the brake pads, but maybe enough. The left main wheel locked, or tried to. The brake pads grabbed. The tire screamed, rubber against concrete at 125 miles per hour. Black smoke erupted from the wheel. The smell of burning rubber filled the cockpit. And then physics took over. The aircraft pivoted, hard, violently. The nose swung left like it was mounted on a pin. The tail swung right with equal force. Newton's third law in action. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. They were ground looping, just as Bobby intended, but faster, harder, more violent than he'd hoped.
The forces were incredible. Bobby felt himself crushed against his harness, the shoulder straps cutting into his chest, the lap belt crushing his pelvis. The G-forces were lateral, not the up and down of aerobatic flight, but sideways, like being in a car that suddenly swerved at 100 miles per hour. His head snapped left, his vision tunneled. Blood pooled on the left side of his body. Jim grunted with pain. Eddie screamed, not fear, just pain. Mike Chen in the tail yelled, "Oh God!" Equipment not secured flew across the cockpit. A clipboard hit Bobby in the shoulder. A thermos smashed against the windscreen. Pencils, maps, a spare oxygen mask, all became projectiles. They were spinning. The world outside rotated like a carousel from hell. Runway, buildings, sky, parked aircraft, fuel dump, too close, way too close. Runway again, buildings again, sky again. The airspeed indicator was unwinding. 110 miles per hour. 100. 95. But they were still spinning, still pivoting. The left main landing gear was taking all the lateral force, thousands of pounds of side load that it was never designed for. The tire exploded. Bang! Like a shotgun going off. Rubber fragments flew everywhere. Now they were pivoting on the bare wheel rim, metal on concrete. Sparks erupted. The sound was like a grinder, high-pitched screaming of metal on stone. The left main landing gear strut was bending. Bobby could see it through his side window. The strut, designed to support 17 tons vertically, was now taking 17 tons laterally at 90 miles per hour. Steel was groaning. Rivets were popping. The strut was yielding. 80 miles per hour. 75. Still spinning. They'd rotated maybe 270 degrees. The nose was now pointing back the way they'd come. They were sliding backward down the runway. Sideways. Spinning. And then the left main landing gear collapsed. Not broke, collapsed. The strut folded. The wheel assembly tore off. The wing dropped. The left wingtip hit the concrete. Sparks exploded. Not like from the wheel rim. Like fireworks. Like a welder's torch. Aluminum on concrete at 70 miles per hour. The wing was grinding. Shredding. Pieces of aluminum tearing off. Rivets popping. Skin panels peeling back. But they were still slowing. Friction. Glorious friction. Every piece of aluminum they left on the runway was energy they were losing. Energy that was keeping them alive. 60 miles per hour. 55. 50. The aircraft was sliding now. Not spinning, just sliding. Wing on the ground, acting like a giant brake. Nose pointing perpendicular to their original direction. Still moving, but slower. So much slower. 45 miles per hour. 40. 35. The right wing dragged, just a little. Tipped down, hit the concrete. More sparks, more friction, more slowing. 30 miles per hour. 25. 20. They'd been decelerating for maybe 12 seconds. Felt like 12 hours. Bobby's brain was recording every detail, every sensation, every sound. The kind of detail you remember when you think you're about to die, and then don't. 15 miles per hour. 10. 5. And then? Stop. Complete stop. No motion. Just silence. Except for the sound of one engine still idling at 500 RPM because Bobby hadn't shut it down yet. And the hiss of hydraulic fluid pouring from ruptured lines. And the tick, tick, tick of hot metal cooling. And the sound of 6 men breathing hard. Bobby sat frozen for 3 seconds. His hands were still on the controls. Throttles. Yoke. Feet still on rudder pedals. body still tensed for impact that hadn't come. Then muscle memory took over. He reached up, pulled the mixture controls to idle cutoff, shut down both engines, flipped the magneto switches to off, battery switch off, fuel shutoff valves closed. Everything by the book. Because even in crisis, training persists. Then he keyed the intercom with a hand that was shaking. "Crew, report." One by one, they checked in. Kowalski, "Okay, bruised ribs." Morrison, "Okay, cut on forehead." Chen, "Okay, bitten tongue." Patterson, "Okay, wrenched shoulder." Radio operator Williams, "Okay, bloody nose." All alive, all conscious, all able to move. They'd done it. They'd ground-looped a B-25 Mitchell at 130 miles per hour and survived. Bobby shut down the remaining engine. "Everybody out, now, before something catches fire." They evacuated through the top hatch, scrambled out, jumped to the concrete, ran 50 yards, and then turned to look. Devil's Dice sat in the middle of runway 09, facing the wrong direction. Left main gear collapsed. Left wing crumpled. Right prop bent from ground contact during the spin. Hydraulic fluid and fuel leaking. But no fire. No explosion. No deaths. The crash crews arrived, looked at the aircraft, looked at the crew. One fire chief walked up to Bobby. "Son," he said slowly, "in 20 years of this job, I have never seen anyone ground loop on purpose. That was either the stupidest thing I've ever seen or the smartest. I'm still deciding which." "Did we stay on the runway?" Bobby asked. The fire chief nodded. "Barely. You stopped with 800 feet to spare. If you'd gone straight, you'd have run off the end, hit the fuel dump, killed everyone." "Then it was the smartest," Bobby said, and sat down on the concrete because his legs suddenly wouldn't hold him. They did the investigation, of course, interviewed the crew, examined the wreckage, calculated the forces involved, ran simulations. The engineering report concluded, ground looping at 130 miles per hour generated sufficient lateral force to reduce forward velocity by 85% within 2,400 feet. Total stopping distance, including initial landing roll, 5,200 feet, within runway parameters. Aircraft destroyed, but crew survived. Technique not recommended for standard operations, but justifiable under circumstances of total hydraulic failure with no alternative. In other words, it worked. Don't do it again unless you have to. Bobby Caldwell flew 17 more missions before the war ended in August 1945. Never had to ground loop again. Thank God. After the war, he became a test pilot, then a flight instructor, then chief pilot for a major airline. Retired in 1985 after 40 years of flying. Never had another emergency as bad as April 17, 1945. But every class of student pilots he taught, he told them about Devil's Dice, about hydraulic failure, about impossible choices, about how sometimes the book answer isn't available and you have to write your own. "The day I ground looped that B-25, he'd say, I broke about 40 regulations. I destroyed a $300,000 aircraft. I could have been court-martialed. But I saved 6 men, and that's the only number that matters. 6 men went home. 6 men had lives, families, futures, because we chose maybe over definitely, because we took the calculated risk over certain death." Aviation is about making decisions with incomplete information. The hydraulics failed. We couldn't bail out safely. We couldn't land conventionally. So we did the unconventional, the dangerous, the thing nobody in their right mind would try. But here's the secret. Sometimes being in your right mind means being willing to try the wrong thing if it's the only thing that might work.
Bobby died in 2003, age 82, surrounded by family. At his funeral, 5 old men attended. Jim Patterson, Eddie Morrison, Mike Chen, David Kowalski, Tom Williams. The crew of Devil's Dice, still alive, still together, still grateful for the split-second decision that saved them all. They brought something with them to the funeral, a piece of metal, part of the left main landing gear from Devil's Dice, the gear that collapsed during the ground loop. Someone had salvaged it from the wreckage in 1945 and given it to Bobby. On it, Bobby had engraved, "Devil's Dice, 17 April 1945. 6 men bet their lives on a spin. 6 men won." That piece of metal now sits in the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, in the B-25 exhibit. Next to it, a placard. Landing gear strut from B-25J 44-30854, Devil's Dice. Aircraft ground-looped intentionally at 130 miles per hour following catastrophic hydraulic failure. April 17, 1945, Kadena, Okinawa. Unconventional procedure resulted in aircraft loss, but crew survival. Example of split-second decision-making under extreme circumstances. What it doesn't say, what can't be captured in a museum placard, is what Bobby taught everyone who flew with him. That sometimes the courage isn't in following procedures. Sometimes the courage is in knowing when to throw out the book and trust your judgment, your crew, and your aircraft to survive something that shouldn't be survivable. That a ground loop, normally a pilot's worst nightmare, can become a tool when you have no other tools. That destruction of an aircraft is acceptable when it buys survival of a crew. That the willingness to break rules, destroy equipment, and face court-martial is what separates good pilots from great ones when lives are on the line. And that 6 men, ranging in age from 19 to 25, bet their lives on physics, centrifugal force, and a captain who was willing to try the impossible. They won that bet, and they spent the next 60 years being grateful they did. Now you. Did you fly? Did you face mechanical failures that forced impossible decisions? Have you ever had to choose between definitely and maybe? Tell me in the comments about the times you broke the rules to save lives, about the split-second calls that worked out, about the crews that trusted you to bring them home. Because Bobby Caldwell would want you to know, sometimes the craziest idea is the only idea that works.